The wind howled through the cracked pavement of 7th Street, carrying with it the bitter sting of late autumn and the faint smell of diesel from the buses that rattled by every 15 minutes. Samuel Sam Carter stood at the corner, his threadbare coat pulled tight against his chest, the collar frayed where it rubbed against his unshaven jaw. His hands, rough and calloused from years of scraping by, clutched a single crumpled dollar bill, the last piece of currency in his possession. It wasn't much, but to Sam it was everything. It was the difference between a cup of watery coffee from the gas station or another night with an empty stomach growling like a stray dog. At 38, Sam looked closer to 50. His dark hair was streaked with gray, his eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights spent wondering how he'd fallen so far. Once he'd had a job at the steel mill, a modest apartment, and a wife who smiled at him like he was the sun itself. But the mill closed, the apartment was lost to unpaid rent, and his wife Clara had slipped away after a battle with cancer that left him with nothing but medical bills and a hollow ache where his heart used to be. Now he was a ghost in his own life, drifting through the city with no anchor, no purpose, until that moment. Across the street, under the flickering glow of a street lamp, stood a stranger. She was small, hunched over, her thin frame swallowed by a coat that looked 2 sizes too big. Her hands trembled as she held a cardboard sign, the marker smudged but still legible. "Anything helps." God bless her eyes, wide and glassy, darted between the passing cars, searching for something. Hope, maybe, or just a flicker of kindness in a world that had turned its back on her. Sam watched her for a long time, longer than he meant to, his thumb rubbing the worn edge of that dollar bill in his pocket. He didn't know her story. Maybe she'd lost a job, a home, a family. Maybe she was running from something worse. But he knew the look in her eyes. It was the same one he saw in the cracked mirror of the shelter bathroom every morning. A quiet, desperate plea to be seen, to matter. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. It wasn't logical. It wasn't smart. But Sam felt a pull, a whisper in his chest that said, "Do this. Give her the dollar." He hesitated, his mind racing. That dollar was his lifeline. He'd been saving it for 3 days, nursing the dream of that coffee, the warmth of it in his hands, the brief escape from the cold reality of his existence. But as he looked at the woman, her shoulders shaking against the wind, he saw Clara's face for a fleeting second, her gentle smile, the way she'd always given what little they had to someone who needed it more. "We're all in this together, Sam," she used to say. The memory hit him like a punch, and before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped off the curb. The street was busy, cars honking as he dodged between them, his boots scuffing against the asphalt. The woman didn't notice him at first, her gaze fixed on the ground. But when he stopped in front of her, she looked up, startled. Her face was weathered, lines etched deep from a life that hadn't been kind. But her eyes, they were a soft hazel, bright despite the shadows around them. "Here," Sam said, his voice rough from disuse. He held out the dollar, his hand trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was giving up. "It's not much, but take it." She blinked, her lips parting as if she wasn't sure what to say. You sure?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Sam nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I'm sure." Her fingers, thin and shaking, closed around the bill. She clutched it to her chest like it was gold, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much. You don't know what this means." Sam shrugged, awkward under her gratitude. "It's just a dollar." "No," she said fiercely, shaking her head. "It's more than that. It's hope." He didn't know how to respond to that. He mumbled something about staying warm and turned away, the wind biting at his face as he crossed back to his side of the street. He didn't look back, but he felt her eyes on him. felt the strange warmth blooming in his chest despite the emptiness in his pocket. For the first time in years, he felt something. Not happiness, not quite, but a flicker of light in the endless gray of his days. That night, Sam slept on a cot in the shelter, the thin blanket doing little to keep out the chill. His stomach growled, but he didn't regret his choice. He closed his eyes, picturing the woman's face, the way her tears had glistened in the street lamp's glow. He didn't know her name, didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but he hoped that Dollar would buy her something, a hot meal, a moment of peace. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to give. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Sam woke to the usual sounds of the shelter, coughs echoing off the concrete walls, the shuffle of feet as men lined up for a stale roll and a cup of watery oatmeal. He ate quickly, his mind still lingering on the stranger from the night before, and then headed out into the city. He had no plan, no destination, just the endless rhythm of survival, scavenging for bottles to trade for a few cents, checking the usual corners for odd jobs that never seemed to materialize. He was halfway down 7th Street, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, when he heard it. A voice calling his name. "Samuel Carter! Hey, Samuel!" He froze, his heart stuttering. No one called him Samuel anymore. Not since Clara. He turned slowly, expecting a mistake, but there was a man jogging toward him, a tall, wiry figure in a navy coat, his breath puffing in the cold air. The man's face was unfamiliar, sharp-featured with a neatly trimmed beard, but his eyes were bright with purpose. "You're Samuel Carter, right?" the man asked, stopping a few feet away. Sam nodded, wary. "Yeah, who's asking?" The man grinned, a wide, genuine smile that caught Sam off guard. "Name's Daniel Pierce. I've been looking for you all morning." Sam's brow furrowed. "Why? I don't know you." "No, you don't," Daniel said, still smiling. "But I know someone who does. Come with me. There's something you need to see." Sam's instincts screamed caution. He'd been scammed before, tricked by smooth talkers promising jobs or handouts that never came. But there was something in Daniel's voice, an earnestness that made Sam pause. Against his better judgment, he followed. Daniel led him 3 blocks over to a small diner, the kind with chip-formed mica tables and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside, the warmth of the place wrapping around Sam like a blanket. The smell of frying bacon hit him hard, his stomach twisting with hunger, but he kept his face neutral. Daniel gestured to a booth in the corner where a woman sat waiting, a woman Sam recognized instantly. It was her, the stranger from the street. But she looked different now, cleaner, her hair brushed back, her coat replaced with a simple sweater. She stood as they approached, her hazel eyes locking onto Sam's with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You," Sam said, his voice barely a whisper. "Me," she said, smiling through tears. "I'm Ellen Harper, and I owe you everything." Sam shook his head, confused. "It was just $1. I don't—" "Sit down," Daniel interrupted gently, sliding into the booth. "Let her explain." Sam sat, his mind spinning as Ellen took a deep breath and began. "I was at my lowest last night," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I've been on the streets for months, lost my job, my apartment, my daughter, everything. That $1 you gave me, it wasn't just money. It was the first time in so long that someone saw me, really saw me. I used it to buy a cup of tea at the gas station, just to warm up, and that's where I met Daniel." Daniel nodded, picking up the story. "I'm a social worker. I stop by that gas station every night, looking for people who need help. Ellen was there, crying into her tea, and we got to talking. She told me about you, about the man who gave her his last $1 when he had nothing left to give." Sam shifted uncomfortably, his cheeks flushing. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was to me," Ellen said fiercely, "and it was to Daniel. He helped me get into a program last night, a shelter with real beds, real support. They're helping me find my daughter Sam. She's been in foster care, and I thought I'd lost her forever. But because of you, I have a chance." Sam stared at her, the words sinking in slow and heavy. I, I'm glad," he managed, his throat tight, "but I still don't get why you were looking for me." Ellen reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "Because I wanted to thank you, and because Daniel has something for you too." Daniel leaned forward, his grin returning. "I've got connections, Sam. People who want to help. That act of kindness you showed Ellen, it's rare. It's the kind of thing that changes people. I made some calls this morning, and there's a job waiting for you. Nothing fancy, maintenance at a community center, but it's steady. Comes with a small apartment, too. A fresh start." "I don't know what to say," he finally croaked, his eyes burning. "Say yes," Ellen said softly. "Say you'll take it. Because you deserve it, Sam. You gave me hope when I had none. Let me give it back to you." He looked between them, Ellen's tearful smile, Daniel's quiet confidence, and something broke inside him. Not in a bad way, but like a dam giving way, releasing years of pain and despair. He nodded, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Yes. The days that followed were a blur of change. Sam started the job, his hands finding purpose again as he fixed leaky faucets and swept floors at the community center. The apartment was small, a single room with a bed, a stove, and a window that looked out on a scraggly tree. But it was his. For the first time in years, he had a key in his pocket, a place to call home. Ellen kept in touch, stopping by the center with updates about her daughter Lily. She'd found her, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with her mother's hazel eyes, and they were working toward reunification. Sam met Lily one afternoon, her small hand slipping into his as she thanked him for helping her mom. He didn't have words for how that felt, just a quiet, steady warmth that settled into his bones. Months passed, and Sam's life grew roots. He made friends at the center, started saving a little money, even bought a cheap coffee maker so he could have that cup he'd dreamed of whenever he wanted. But the real change wasn't in the things he had. It was in him. He smiled more, stood taller, felt the weight of the past lift just enough to let him breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sam walked back to 7th Street. He stood under that same street lamp, the one where he'd met Ellen, and looked out at the city he'd once hated. It didn't look so gray anymore. He thought of Clara, of the dollar, of the stranger who'd become a friend. And he realized something. Kindness wasn't just a moment. It was a ripple, spreading further than he could ever imagine. So there it is, the story of Sam Carter, a poor man who gave his last dollar to a stranger and woke up to a life he never thought he'd have again. It's a tale of hope, of second chances, of the power of a single act to change everything. If it touched your heart, if it made you feel something deep in your soul, then hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Stick around too. There's more where this came from, and I'd love for you to see the latest videos. Let's keep spreading kindness, one ripple at a time,